Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you all for that very generous reception. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank Moore for that very generous introduction, that very warm introduction. I'm glad somebody thinks that I continue to be a young man. I've got three beautiful young children at home, an 11-year-old girl. I've got a 7-year-old, 9-year-old boy. When my wife had a big birthday a couple of years ago, I warned the kids. I said, now look, we're not putting a bunch of candles on the cake. We're not going to talk about mommy's age. This is a sensitive birthday. We're going to just have a nice, quiet family dinner. Things were going beautifully. Until the middle of dinner, my little girl looks at my wife and says, Mommy, you were born in the last century? She couldn't believe how old. So I'm glad somebody at least considers us still to be young. I want to thank Bobby for his tremendous leadership of the Republican Party. He has been a personal friend of mine for years, done a tremendous job for all of us. Let's give him a great round of applause for what he has done. I also want to thank Rick, your governor, another personal friend. What tremendous courage and leadership. Rick, along with members of the legislature, other officials here, for example, signing right-to-work legislation, sending a loud message to the rest of the country that Michigan is open for business. I'm so grateful to be up here. Bobby knows I've got family. My mom's youngest sister is actually up here and lived her adult life and raised her children in Michigan. I've spent many, many summers up here, so it is great to be back here with you. I want to start with a quote from Mark Twain. Let me say, Senator, it is an honor to be here with you as well. And I know we're all looking forward to Senator Paul's remarks later tonight as well. You know, I want to start with a quote from Mark Twain. I'm going to paraphrase. He said something I'm finding to be truer and truer in my life. He basically said this. He said, the older you get, the smarter your parents become. I don't know about your experience. I remember when I was a kid, I used to roll my eyes at the things my parents would tell me. And now that I'm a father, I find myself becoming more and more like my father. One of the things my father would love to say when we were young kids at the dinner table, sons, you better eat your vegetables. There are children starving in China. I never understood that. I remember thinking they could have my vegetables if they want. What does that have to do with me? There was another quote he'd often say. He'd say, now, sons, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? And I never understood that one either, but here's the third thing he would say. Every day he'd tell my brother and me, he said, sons, you should be grateful. You are blessed to be born and to live in the greatest country in the history of the world. You should be proud and grateful and get on your knees every day and say thanks that you're an American. Now, I'll be honest with you, as a smart aleck little kid, I'm not sure I always understood what he was trying to teach us. Now, I've got 3 young kids. I know exactly what he was trying to teach us. You see, my parents, they lived the American dream. My parents are living proof that in this great country, the circumstances of your birth don't determine your outcome as an adult. My parents are great proof that if you're willing to work hard and get a great education, you can do better than your parents did. See, it started with my dad. He's one of 9 kids. The first and only one to get past the 5th grade. Literally grew up in one of those homes without running water, without electricity. I know because I heard these stories every single day growing up. He walked uphill going to school. They walked uphill coming back from school. They couldn't afford downhill. You try getting an allowance out of this man. I said, Dad, you should pay me for the chores I do around the house. He said, son, how much do you reckon you're going to pay me for the food you eat, the roof I put on top of your... I was going to pay him more than I was going to get an allowance. I was going to owe him money before he was done. But you see, my parents came over 40 years ago. My mom was pregnant with me so that they came to Louisiana from halfway across the world so that she could study at LSU. And I still am amazed at this journey. They knew nobody in Louisiana. They land there. My dad doesn't have a job. He doesn't want a handout. He's got the confidence that he can find work and he can pay to provide for his family. He literally opens up the yellow pages and starts calling company after company until he gets a job. Now, I want you to understand something. My dad's got an accent. Now, I don't mean a southern accent like me. I mean, he's got a real accent. And he's calling company after company, and he finally gets somebody. Sight unseen, a little railroad service company in Baton Rouge. The guy offers him a job. He's so impressed by his tenacity and his willingness to work. And then my dad says, that's great. The guy says, you can start Monday. My dad says, that's great. He says, look, I don't have a driver's license. I don't have a car. You're going to have to come pick me up on the way to work. And the guy did. 6 months later, when I was born, I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. They were married. They just didn't have insurance that covered me. The insurance through LSU covered my mom and dad, but they were already pregnant with me, so it didn't cover me. So this is what my dad did. He shook hands with the doctor, and he decided to pay him on a monthly plan so he'd pay that bill off entirely. No government program, no forms. 2 of my 3 kids were born at that same hospital. It took us hours to fill out the paperwork, and we had good insurance. But it was a simpler time back then. You didn't expect the government. You didn't expect somebody else to do it. You paid your own bills. You paid your own way. I don't know if that would work today. I asked my dad, how do you pay for a baby on an installment plan? I mean, if you miss a payment, do they come take the baby back and they repossess the... He said I was such a bad little kid, he would have skipped a payment just to send me back if that was an option. But he guarantees me he paid all the bills in full. By the way, our 3rd kid, he would have been born at that same hospital. He was the one that was born at home. That's another story for another day. I'll just tell you this. I've had so many guys come up to me and say, Governor, you did a great job. I mean, you and your wife were alone. You caught that. I said, I didn't do anything. My wife did all of the work. The dumbest thing I ever heard was a week after that happened. A guy came up to me in church and said, the same thing happened to me. I said, really? He said, yeah, I had a kidney stone once. It was the same. I said, don't you dare tell your wife that. I said, she will. All I've got to say is, having witnessed the birth of my child at home with just the 2 of us, there's a reason God doesn't let men have babies. I don't care how brave and strong we think we are. There'd be exactly 1 child born. We'd be done. But I tell you all this because my dad, when he was raising us, he would always tell us, now, boys, I'm not leaving you a famous last name. I'm not leaving you an inheritance, but I'm going to make sure you get a great education. How many times have moms and dads in this great country told our children, if you get a great education, there's no limit to what you can do, what you can become. You could become an entrepreneur. You could become a lawyer. You could start your own business. You could become a doctor. You could become whatever you want to be. How many moms and dads have told their children, you might one day grow up to be president of the United States? In our country, we believe anybody can grow up to become president of the United States. Last year, unfortunately, we realized just how true that was after the election results. But that brings me to the issue that I want to talk to you about today. I think it's one of the most important issues facing my state, your state, and our country. And that is the challenge of making sure that every child in America gets a great education. You know, we all say we believe that every child should have an equal opportunity to get a great education. The sad truth is that's not happening today. We all say that the circumstances of a child's birth, you don't need to be born in the right zip code, to the right parents, to the right gender, to the right race in order to get a great education, to live the American dream. But too many children are trapped in failing schools. The reality is, I suspect the majority of us, we would move to neighborhoods with great public schools. If we can't do that, we would save enough money to send our kids to great private schools. We'll make the right choices for our kids. Too many children aren't having the opportunity to get a great education. This is why it's so important. I'd argue there are 2 reasons. One is just a practical imperative. If you're in your 50s, America ranked #1 for educational attainment when you were going to school. Today, if you're in your 20s, we rank 16th in the world. We're number 16 doesn't sound like a great American rallying cry. That's not who we are as a people. And if we're serious about wanting to be the world's greatest military power, the world's greatest economy, the world's greatest quality of life, if we're serious about lowering incarceration rates, improving healthcare outcomes, and growing our economy, it all comes back to education. But it's not just a practical imperative. I would argue there's a moral imperative. Because you see, there's really just 2 choices. This president, he believes in equality of outcomes. He believes in a bigger, stronger, more powerful government, redistributing wealth, punishing those that are successful, that take risks. That's one view of the American dream. It's not my view. There's a different view of the American dream that says our children are promised and guaranteed equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. That they should have the chance, like my dad did, to work hard, to leave more opportunities for their kids than they inherited from their parents, but it starts with a great education. Now, it really isn't that complicated. I'll tell you just two simple things we have done in Louisiana that are absolutely critical. I could talk about dozens of laws, like the letter grade law we've done for every school, every public school in the state. I could talk about the tax deduction we give to folks for the money they spend on tuition, and so many other reforms we've done with a discipline in the classroom. But there are two important concepts. Number one, it really starts with putting a great teacher in every classroom. Now, everybody says they're for that. You polled it, I'm sure it'd be at 100%. Every one of us here probably remembers that great teacher that took a special interest in us, that was a little bit harder on us, is the reason we are here and where we are today. Maybe it was a math teacher, a science teacher, an elementary school teacher. Every one of us remembers that great teacher. Yet you look at how we hire, pay, look at how we promote teachers today. If you had a small business and I told you that after 3 years you basically can't fire an employee, if you had a small business and I told you you've got 2 employees working side by side, you can't pay one because they show up earlier, stay later, and are more productive than the one next door, you've got to pay them exactly the same. You probably wouldn't stay in business very long. Yet in America, for too long, we have paid teachers based on how long they've been breathing inside that classroom instead of what they're actually doing inside of that classroom. We've got tenure laws that make no sense in this country. In Louisiana, we've revamped all of our laws based on how we hire, fire, teach, promote, pay our teachers, linking it all to student achievement. One of the unions said, "Governor, we don't mind you evaluating our teachers. We just wish you wouldn't link it so closely to student achievement." Now, I suspect there's some football fans out here. I know Michigan, Michigan State, and some of your other universities are pretty proud of your teams like we are in Louisiana. I'd say that's like going to a football game and saying, "Don't worry about the score at the end of the game." If it's not about student achievement, what's it about? But here's the second thing we did. And by the way, the great teachers, the good teachers, they get it. This is about helping them to succeed and giving them the opportunities and awards for doing so. We're paying teachers more. We've done $2,000 and more in teacher pay raises. We've done a lot to invest in our classrooms. But here's the second thing, because it can't just be about more money. It's also about saying, secondly, the dollars have to follow the child instead of forcing the children to follow the dollars. Now, this is a pretty simple concept. No two children learn exactly alike. Every child is different. Every parent knows their children's needs better than the bureaucrats, than a one-size-fits-all bureaucracy. So in Louisiana, we've said this. If that child's going to learn in a traditional public school or a charter school or an online school, a private school, a parochial school, a Christian school, an independent school, wherever, homeschooled, wherever, we want the dollars to follow the child. So we've done things. So, for example, in New Orleans, 90% of our kids are now in charter schools, highest percentage of any major city in America. In 5 years, we have doubled the percentage of kids doing reading and math on grade level. People will tell you, well, you can only make incremental reforms. That's nonsense. Our children only grow up once. They deserve a great education today. You cannot tell those children to wait. Second thing we've done, we've adopted one of the country's most expansive, most ambitious, most comprehensive educational choice program, where the dollars follow the students. We started in New Orleans my first year as governor, made it statewide a couple of years ago. By the way, we had 10,000 applicants. We placed 5,000 kids last year. This year we had 12,000 applicants, placed 8,000 kids. Saved tens of millions of dollars, gotten better educational outcomes. 93% of the parents are happy or thrilled with the program. So kids are now going to private schools, independent schools, parochial schools, and other schools, and doing better than they were doing before academically. Now, you would think if you had those kinds of results, parents are making those kinds of choices, everybody would be celebrating their success. Instead, here's what the teacher unions had to say. In Louisiana, they said, one of their officials said this, "Governor," well, they didn't address it to me, they addressed it to the newspaper, but they said this. They said, "Parents, poor parents in particular, but parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices for their children." I can't think of anything more offensive than that. I called for that person to be fired, to apologize, to stand down from their comments. None of that happened. I can't think of a better contrast between what they think and what we think. I met with a group of moms at my house the next day. They said, "Bobby, every single day, we make more decisions for our kids, and we know the needs of our children better than those bureaucrats in Baton Rouge or Washington, D.C. But make no mistake, for too many people, education reform is about the adults. It needs to be about the children in the classroom. And here, and now I want to get to something that really makes me mad about this. These teacher unions, they try to fight us at the ballot box, they lost. They try to fight us in the legislature, and they lost. They try to recall me, the Speaker of the House, the chairman of some of our committees. They lost there too. They fought us all the way up to the state Supreme Court. Our program is still standing. But I want to share with you something that makes me mad. Nearly 50 years to the day, the anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, nearly 50 years to the day, Eric Holder, the Obama administration, the Department of Justice went to federal court. They went to federal court to try to stop these children from being able to go to these schools. Now, I want you to remember, this is a program where 100% of these kids are low income. 100% of these kids are coming from failing schools. 90% of these kids are minorities. And the Obama administration wants to trap these children in failing schools. What is perverse about this, they want to use the same laws designed to protect these kids to trap these kids. What is hypocritical about this is Eric Holder and the president would never send their children to these failing schools. They shouldn't send our children to these schools. You know, I got a little worried. I was pleased the Wall Street Journal editorialized for us, and that was okay. National Review editorialized for us, and that was okay. The Weekly Standard editorialized for us, and that was okay. This got me concerned. The Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune also editorialized for us. And it got to me to wondering, why in the world would the president pick on these kids, these families? I don't begrudge him the right to send his daughters to the best schools he can select for them. I want these parents to have that same opportunity. The only reason for this lawsuit is this administration is bought and paid for by the teacher unions, by the government unions. They're putting the unions' needs above the needs of the kids of Louisiana and America. I went to D.C. I've invited the president, I've invited the attorney general to come meet those parents, come meet those children, look them in the face, tell them why they don't deserve educational choice. And I've told them we're going to fight them every step of the way, but it made me think, how in the world do you get to the point where you have the federal government fighting against your kids? A federal government so big, so intrusive, so expansive, it's trying to take away rights from the neediest, the kids that most desperately need this chance to break the cycle of poverty. This is what happens when you have a government that's so big that it's trying to run our lives. This is what happens when you have a government so big. I don't think this president trusts the American people as much as he trusts government. Bill Clinton famously said years ago, the era of big government is over. Never before in modern political history has somebody been so wrong about something so important. I mean, you think about it, you listen to the president's own defenders when the scandals broke about the NSA and the Department of Justice and the AP reporters, his own defenders said the government is so vast, so expansive, the president can't possibly know what is happening. That's the problem. You know, if I could have gone back in time 4.5 years ago, if I stood here today and I predicted for you, we're going to have entitlement programs going broke, and yet the president is going to create a brand new expensive entitlement program, would you have actually believed that would have happened? No. If I had gone back in time 4.5 years ago and predicted for you that the president would increase the debt to nearly $17 trillion, would you have believed that was going to happen in our country? No. If I'd gone back 4.5 years ago and said to you that the president was going to use the Department of Justice to spy on AP reporters, would you have believed that would have happened in our country? No. If I'd gone back 4.5 years ago and told you the president was going to use the IRS to go after conservatives, everyday patriotic Americans exercising their First Amendment rights, would you have believed that could have happened in this country? No. If I'd gone back 4.5 years ago and predicted for you this president was going to outsource our foreign policy to the Russians, put them in charge of our foreign policy, would you have believed that would have happened? No. If I'd gone back 4.5 years ago and told you that our ambassador and 3 other Americans would be killed in Libya and they were going to blame a YouTube video, would you have believed that would have happened in America? No. If If I'd gone back 4.5 years ago and told you then that our Secretary of State, then Secretary Clinton, would be in front of a Senate committee and gotten so frustrated at answering questions about how this happened that she would say, what difference does it make? Would you have believed that would have happened in our country? No. We can go on and on, but here's the point. You couldn't make this up. 4.5 years ago, if you'd gone and predicted these things, you'd have said that wouldn't happen in America. And I've got a question I truly don't know the answer to. It's one of those chicken or egg questions. It's one of those questions I truly think, it's one of these questions I've been struggling with these last 4.5 years. I'm trying to figure out whether this administration is the most ideologically liberal administration we have seen in our modern history as a country, or whether it is the most incompetent administration we have seen in the history of our country. My answer, to quote Secretary Clinton, what difference does it make? I've got a message to the White House, to the folks in Washington, D.C. He doesn't trust the American people. He has presided over an unprecedented growth of the government, spending, borrowing, and an erosion of our liberties. And we see it with this lawsuit, and we see it with his other policies. We see it with Obamacare. But I've got a message to the President of the United States. There's a rebellion brewing in these here states, and you see it in state capitals all over America. People are standing up for liberty. We're standing up for freedom. We've said we've had enough. We're going to fight them on educational choice in Louisiana, and we're going to continue to fight, and here's my prediction. Like every generation before us, we're going to continue to provide more opportunities to our children than we inherited from our parents. We are not going to be the first generation that mortgages their future. We're not going to be the first generation that mortgages their freedoms, their birthright, their privilege of being raised in the greatest country in the history of the world. I didn't quite get it decades ago when my dad was trying to teach me about the fact that I was blessed to live in the greatest country in the history of the world. I get it today, and with your help, we're going to fight to make sure that it continues to be so for those young children at home and for one day for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. God bless you, and thank you for the great work you're doing in Michigan. God bless you all, and good night.